What is up, everybody? We are back with our top 25 series. We are talking about one of the kind of interesting teams this year, number 8, Missouri. You heard that right. Number 8, top 10 rated program in the country, Missouri Tigers, the 2024 preview. We're obviously going to be talking about that man, Luther Burden. We're going to be going through their offense, their defense, recruiting, what they're doing there, the impact players that they have, and their 2024 schedule. And hey, can they really be a legitimate player in this new SEC? What are we looking at there? And Eli Drinkwitz, what has he got? Well, the head coach is interesting. He says a lot of controversial things out there. But last year, they had a good squad. 2023, 11-2 last year when you're looking at overall. They finished 8th in the AP poll there. And hey, shout out Missouri beating Ohio State. Anytime that someone beats Ohio State, I'm happy that in the Cotton Bowl 14-3. When you look at their schedule overall, their 2 losses. They lost by 10 to LSU, a high-scoring affair, 49-39, and then they lost to Georgia in a game they probably should have won. Like, they could have beat Georgia last year in that game. Those are their 2 losses. If those are your 2 losses, that's not a bad year. With what they were able to do in Missouri. And like we're going to be mentioning, they are recruiting well. They are portaling well. Like, the NIL they got going out there in Missouri is really good, and they want to compete. And the fact that they were able to keep Luther Burden, I think, speaks very well of this coaching staff, because a lot of people thought he was going to transfer 2 years ago, and he stayed. I know he's kind of a legacy kid, but them being able to do that is a plus for this team and moving forward. When you're looking at their offense, a lot of, when you're looking here, a lot of guys that you like. We have some transfer portal guys we're going to talk about. They were a top 25 unit last year. I think the one number that stands out to me from their numbers last year, red zone scoring percentage, they were number 2 in the nation last year, 97% conversion rate. That is special. When you're thinking of like, hey, do they score in the red zone? Yes, they do. They don't leave scoring opportunities on the field. They score, and that's part of that there. They were top 50-ish rushing statistics in most players there. From a passing standpoint, they were okay. Yards per pass, they were top 10. A lot of that has to do with the yak of these wide receivers. And overall passing yards per game, they were 36th in the nation. They did get sacked a lot. They were 71st last year in sacks allowed. So that's part of that offensive line issue that they had. But overall, a very solid squad.
Yeah, for sure. They are returning 3 of their offensive linemen that started last year. So I think hoping that those guys take a step forward. Really, they were really good run blockers. And when you look at what Cody Schrader was able to do behind that offensive line last year, you get pretty excited about what this rushing attack can be. Luther Burden is an extension of that rushing attack, though we saw him, work downfield a lot more last year. I think part of that was because Schrader was so effective as their starting running back, so they were able to use that. I think with some of the new blood in that running back room, I think we might get more. Let's get the ball into Luther Burden's hands and let him make plays. But Theo Weiss Jr., good player. Mookie Cooper, also a good player. Like, they have good players on this offense. And Brady Cook is I would argue, one of the most underrated quarterbacks in college football. I like Brady Cook for what he's able to do. I don't think he's a high-level NFL guy, but I could also see him being a high-level backup in the NFL for a pretty long time. Drew Pine comes in. Interesting. That dude's played at like 7 colleges in the last 3 years. But overall, I still think this offense can be super efficient, super effective. Anytime you have a player like Luther Burden, you're in good shape.
Yeah, no, Brady Cook last year, 3,300 yards, 21 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, did enough, right? And I think the thing with him is he's a hard player to scout, because I think it's one of those things where he's efficient enough to win you 11 games, but he can be good enough to win you an SEC. Can he get you in that competition thing? I think that's the big thing for him. Luther Burden last year, 86 catches, 1,200 yards, 9 touchdowns. He was fantastic. And the one thing I loved about them this last year in their offensive scheme, they moved him around a lot, right? They in a slot and the outside, like, especially because primarily when you're looking at what he did his freshman year, it was primarily, hey, slot, this is what you're going to be. You're going to be that Debo. We hear the Debo comps all the time for him. You're going to kind of do those short screens and go, these end arounds. But then last year, it's like, no, we're going to push the ball downfield. We're going to make you special. And those teams found out about Luther Burden, and he was there. Again, they're very veteran guys, though. I feel like we've talked about Theo Weiss, these guys for a long time. Marcus Carroll, Nate Noel, these transfer running backs, they've been around. Like, we've talked about that. So I think they can lean on that experience there. As far as losses go, most of their losses came from the defensive side. Offensively, Javon Foster, obviously left tackle. Cody Schrader, 1,600 yards rushing last year, 14 touchdowns, 191 yards. Yes, but they addressed that in the portal. They did a good job there. Xavier Delgado, Dennis Jackson, like, most wouldn't say that's a That's a notable loss, but he is definitely on there in terms of transfers that we saw. Other than that, I mean, Cody is the big one, but I think they have two very, very solid backs back there.
Yeah, Cody's the production loss for
Yeah.
sure. I loved his. I thought he was really really good last year. I loved his film. We know his NFL upside's a little limited just because of his path, but Javon Foster was a fantastic left tackle for them too, and I am curious to see if they have solved that problem. I think they have a good shot at solving that, but Foster was good across the board. I think he saved that offensive line from being even worse than it was at times. So I'm curious to see how they replace those two
Yeah.
players. But really, they've done enough where I think they're at least taking shots at replacing those players.
Yeah, the other guy I didn't mention that I actually liked as a recruit, Jabari Johnson. He was from Washington and he came over there. He transferred out. I didn't put him on here because he obviously didn't play. Jake Garcia also there, but he's at Oregon State now. But again, they really set themselves up for last year, this year. What is that going to look like? Hey, can we kind of go for it here and go to the playoff? I think that's really what you're looking at. From a recruiting standpoint, listen, Missouri don't recruit amazingly well at times, but like they really address certain areas. I think defensively they had a hell of a class here defensively. Offensively, they got some guys. Courtney Crutchfield here. He was, when you're looking at it overall from the wide receiver position, number 10 overall. So they definitely brought in a top 10 class there, or top 10 player there. The next guy, James Madison. Lacey is an interesting one. Quan Lacey at the running back spot. Rumors about him going possibly to Alabama, some of these places. And he ends up in Missouri, which is very, very solid for them. Those are their big gets. They were 21 rank overall, 20 composite, and then they were 13 transfers that we'll get into. But their defensive class is much better than their offensive class, but they got three guys. I think Lacey, Madison, Crutchfield are good for this offense.
Yeah, Lacey's recruitment was a little wild.
Yeah.
He was crystal balled to like four different teams down the stretch there. And he lands in Missouri, which I think is really good for them. I think he's a really talented player. I like the two wide receivers there. When we talk about this recruiting class, though, I think in 2-3 years we're going to be talking about the defensive side. So
Yeah.
I'll save a lot of my comments for the guys that they got on that side. But overall, I mean, to put together the top 20 class at Missouri is, I mean, impressive enough. They've been recruiting well for the last few years. I think that's continued this year as well.
Yeah, and they recruit well, and then they also, what they get? They get guys. They get transfers on this side. And big thing for me, Caden Green coming over from Oklahoma, 6'4", 315 tackle. That was the big get. I think he was one of the highest rated offensive linemen in the portal. They grabbed him. That was a very, very good get by them. I just put Drew Pine on here for fun because Drew Pine's been in college football for a very, very long time. But the two running backs I really like? I really like Nate Noel from Appalachian State. He was a player that I thought, kind of that scat back, 5'10", 180-ish, can kind of bring that different to the field there. And then Marcus Carroll has always been a very, very solid running back. When you're looking at him, coming from Georgia State, and he was a 4-star transfer portal guy. Marcus Carroll is that, in my opinion, he's that kind of bruiser, kind of Cody Schrader-esque in terms of like as a runner. But Nate Noel gives him a little bit more depth. I think they're not going to have to lean on Marcus Carroll so much. I think Noel is going to be there as well. Obviously brought in Marcus Bryant as well over there from SMU, 6'6", 260, big kid. But very solid class. I love what they did in the portal. I think they addressed a lot of needs.
Yeah, for sure. And I didn't want to spoil it before we got to this cool slide, but the two running backs and the two offensive tackles are how you replace Javon Foster and Cody Schrader. And
Yes.
so I think they've done enough. Hopefully, a couple of these guys can step up. Not every transfer works out. I do think if I had to pick which running back I like more, it's Noel. But I do think you're right that Carroll fits what they did last year a little bit better. I'm curious to see if they kind of adapt their offense a little bit more, though, and get Noel involved in the passing game and out into space and things like that. But these offensive tackles, at least one of them, I think, is going to be good enough. So I think they've done a really good job in addressing their needs in the portal.
Yeah, and when you talk about impact players, I mean, really, there's Luther Burden. Like we know that's there. But the thing with Carroll that I wanted to bring up, last year at Georgia State, he had 275 carries, 1,300 yards, 13 touchdowns. He also had 234 yards receiving. So this kid, he had over 1,500 yards from scrimmage. Like he's a type of guy that you're like, wow. Hey, now that was at Georgia State. Playing at Georgia State and then playing at Missouri in the SEC, that's a little bit of a different, like we're going to have to see that competition level there. But I like that they addressed that. But this team's going to live and die by Brady Cook's decision-making, and can Luther Burden be Luther Burden's superhero? Can he do that thing? And I think they have good depth. The wide receivers, you kind of mentioned that. But Luther Burden, man, this is your team. This is what can you do this year?
Yep. like you mentioned, he stayed there when everyone thought he was going to transfer. He stayed committed there even when every big team came
Yeah.
calling for him. So this is his time to kind of prove that he made the right choice and really carry this offense. Because as we get into the defense, while they have recruited well, this offense is going to be what takes them into the top 10 if that's where they land at the end of the season. Because they have the ability to be efficient and to score a ton of points when you have a guy like Burden, like I mentioned. They're gonna have to do it, and Burton's gonna have to probably take over some games and just show like I am the
Yeah.
best wide receiver in the nation right now. So I'm very very excited to watch this team on offense specifically. Maybe not as excited to watch the defense, to be completely honest.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing about this. When we were talking about it, it is interesting on the defensive side. So they lost a lot of guys. We're gonna get into kind of the notable losses and everything there from like just a metric standpoint, and with the numbers that they put up last year, or they gave up last year. Opponent points per game, they were okay, 21.8. That was top 30 in the nation. So you like that. They kind of like a bend not break kind of defense at certain games, except for against LSU, against Georgia, some of those teams, which you have to at some point. You got to put it together. You can't give up those points on that side. Opponent yards per play, they're top 40. Rushing defense, they were okay. They were like probably a top 30 squad in that range, 25 to 30 there. From a pass defense perspective, they again kind of okay. They were basically 40 to 70 in a lot of those metrics. Sack percentage, though, is where they stood out. They were a top 10 team coming after the football. So when you're looking at just from a sack percentage area there, they got after that football and that quarterback, and it was pretty evenly distributed. So I think when I went through it, they had at least 15 players that had one sack on that defense. So they definitely came through there. Darius Robinson had the most at 8.5, and then Johnny Walker had 5. But they really kind of came after that. But they do lose some pieces here, and they're going to have to address that, because if they want to be that next level, that playoff kind of contender, a top 8 worthy team, this defense has got to step up.
Yeah, and they hit the portal well. We'll talk about that shortly, but I think they got impact players from the portal, which, as we mentioned through this series, that sometimes can be tough to do. But Toriano Pride Jr., I think that's a really fantastic get. Dalen Carnell is coming back, and I think that him being your star, you're hoping that he takes a step forward. You mentioned Johnny Walker; they're gonna need sack production from him because losing Darius Robinson is a pretty huge thing. And then Jeremiah Beasley coming over from Michigan, I think, is going to play a role. He's not slated as a starter right now, but I think they need to be deep at linebacker. There's a reason we have 4 guys listed at 2 of the linebacker spots here because of how this defense kind of
Yeah.
plays. So I'm curious to see if they can find production in places and if some of these guys can take steps forward. But they lost a lot, and it's really, really tough to just plug and play when no offense, but when you're Missouri and you don't have all of the 5 stars coming in consistently over year after year, the way Georgia, Ohio State, all these guys do. So I'm curious to see if they do it. They were coached well last year, but we'll see how it plays out. But to me, they did enough to where I don't think this is a terrible unit. I'm struggling to see how this is a top 10 unit, or even good enough to get this team into the top 10 when the season's over.
Yeah, now they have Corey Batoon there. He takes over as coordinator, and they kind of found a rhythm late last year. I did think they had that. Like when you're looking at it, at the beginning of the year, but after that Georgia game, they only allowed 14 or fewer points in 4 of its last 6 games. So you saw kind of like down the stretch, they kind of figured out. But like you mentioned, they have some notable losses on this. Darius Robinson, Ennis Rakestraw, Tyron Hopper, these guys here. So 3 of last year's 4 top tacklers are gone, right? 3 NFL-bound defensive backs too. And then really, it's Darius Robinson. Like I think that is their big loss when we're talking about just from a numbers perspective. Talked about the sacks, 8.5, 43 tackles last year, forced fumble, for fumble recovery. These are the things that we saw from him. And that's really what it comes down to, is kind of replacing that, because that's really where they got off the football.
Yeah, and with Robinson, it wasn't even always the sack. Like the sacks came, but the hurries and the pressures and
Yeah.
all that stuff, he was just such a dominant force on that defensive line. It's going to be really tough to replace him. But then you talk about 2 of your 2 starting corners in Rakestraw and Abrams Drain. Like those are 2 players that got drafted very highly because they were really, really good. It's going to be tough to do that as well. Hopper is no slouch in the middle of that defense either. So it's tough. It's going to be a tough group to replace, like I said. But they hit recruiting hard, they hit the portal hard. Maybe some of these guys can just be, hidden gems, I guess, in college football 25 terms. But we're hoping for Missouri's sake.
Well, there is one not hidden gem. That's
Hmm.
Williams Noani.
Yeah.
He's number 2 rated defensive lineman coming in there, 5-star kid. And this is where Missouri's done a pretty good job of going out and get guys like this. Like they can definitely find him. He is phenomenal. Physical tools out there, verified athleticism when you're seeing that. And we don't usually see guys come in at 6'6", 260. But he's already there, and he could definitely be an impact player this year. Like when you're looking at it from a defensive side, for our Substack, I'm kind of writing like impact players and offense this week, defense next week. Norani's going to be a big guy on that can really make an impact this year as a freshman coming in. Like very, very good in space. They talk about his dip and bin flexibility is huge. They're really good. Just the tape on this kid. He made high schoolers look silly out there. Like those tackles could not stop this kid, and he could step in there. When you think about that, as a junior, he had 13 sacks there. He had 6 as a senior, but that's a lot because a lot of things they were kind of shading his way. But he had 50 tackles, 13 tackles for loss there, 3 forced fumbles. He was one of the best players out there in Lee Summit, Missouri. That's a huge gauge. Jalen Brown as well, Trinity Greco, Jaron Sensabaugh, Cameron Keys, Elias Williams. They attacked the defensive side.
Yes, they did. On Nwaneri, he has been dubbed a potential first-round NFL draft pick since 2022. If you look at 24/7 Sports recruiting and like the scouting reports that they write up, they have had him in as a first rounder since then. And his comparison, and it makes sense when you watch him, is to Eric Armstead, who has been a Pro Bowler, potential. I think he's gotten an All Pro or two. So like this is a kid that will be drafted in the first round. The same way they were able to land Luther Burden, the hometown kid. They were able to get him committed to Missouri. And so I just can't say enough about how they've been able to do that. That's an impressive feat, especially with all these big teams throwing money around like crazy. But it didn't stop there. Like I said, the hidden gems thing is more like, can some of these 3-stars step up? Can some of these transfers step in?
Yeah.
But they've got a ton of 4-star kids that I think might have to play this year just based on all those losses. So a lot of talented players. They did a fantastic job on the recruiting trail here.
Well, it's funny because I mentioned Williams, and I go, well, Elias Williams is pretty damn good too. 6'4", 268, comes in as a top 40 kid, but they love this kid, and they say just how athletic it is. 34-inch arms. When you talk about that, 10-inch hands. They talked about his range. They said he's very good at pursuit. He has 14 sacks over his final 2 years there, and they like him as a 5 technique. But to me, Williams is that prototypical pass rusher. He's going to get out the quarterback. Like his ability to kind of get in that and disrupt her. These two guys together, they keep these guys. The reason why they've been successful in the SEC, in my opinion, even in the beginning, they recruit edge guys and defensive linemen like this, and they get guys that can go after the quarterback. That's how you win in the SEC, and they've been able to do that. So that front seven, they've addressed that, and I love those two guys. And if Greco and Sensabaugh and those guys kind of pan out from a defensive back perspective, this is a pretty damn good defense. They'll keep you in games, right? That's what you do, and then you plug and play on that offensive side. As far as transfers, they got a lot of guys on this list. But Toriano Pride Jr. coming over from Clemson, I think that was the big one. They mentioned him plenty of times. Darius Smith coming over from Georgia. And again, we talk about it a lot, and I really truly believe this. If you're getting guys from Clemson and Georgia and Michigan, like they got Jeremiah Beasley, that matters, right? Florida, Chris McKellen as well. Like those guys can really make damage because they're used to playing in those big conferences against big competition, right? They're not going after those transfers we've been talking about from Georgia. They went after running back from Georgia State, but that defensive side, like Georgia State guys like that, from a defensive perspective, they got dudes on the defensive side. Even like Corey Flack, he came from the U, Miami, right? Zion Young, coming from Michigan State. They went and got guys in this room, and these are all impact guys. It would not shock me to see any of these guys like get on that field and really impact games.
It's interesting to think about the theory behind that too, because when you look at the best defense that we've seen, it was the Georgia defense a couple of years ago, right? And what did they have? Incredibly athletic dudes that had played against Power 5 competition. That's what they're hoping for with this group. And a ton of these guys came in as really, really highly rated recruits as well. Didn't see the playing time, but still probably have talent. We've seen a ton of these players transfer out from those schools and become, first round draft picks. Jared Verse
Mhm.
comes to mind, transferring from Georgia to Florida. Missouri's doing a good job in attacking that on this side of the ball, but knowing that there's some skill based stuff that can transfer from those smaller schools on the offensive side. I think they've got a really good system going here. There are probably 4 or 5 impact players just from this list, which is an impressive thing to do on the transfer portal.
Yeah, no, they did a great job. This is where that coaching staff makes their money, in my opinion. Now, as far as like, when you look at impact players, touring on with pride, Williams and Rye, I put him on here. I put Johnny Walker, obviously. I think really when you're looking at Johnny Walker and what he's been able to do, he was a breakout pass rusher. I think he can really step up. I didn't put Christian Williams on here, but you could have. I know we have Christian Williams out there. Chuck Hicks, linebacker, Tristan Newsom, those guys. We didn't really talk about their back end, but again, you talk about Dalen Carnell, those type of guys. You have to like what they can do. But up front, let's see what they can do up front. That's really where this defense has got to step up.
Yeah, I mean the top three here, I think are the big ones. I do think, not because I share a name with them, but I think Christian Williams anchoring the interior of that
Mm-hmm.
defense is going to be a little more critical this year since they are losing, a lot of pass rush production and hurries and pressures and things like that with Darius Robinson. So anchoring that run defense, I think, him taking a step forward, he was good. He was a really good space eater last year. Hopefully, we can get more pass rush production from him. He can get into the backfield a little bit more. That would be huge for this defensive line because I think you are. I mean, it's not ideal that you're relying. I know he's a 5-star kid and he should be an impact player, but it's not ideal that you're relying on someone like that who never
Yeah.
has played college football to be an impact player. I think he's got every capability of doing that, but yeah, this defense, this is going to look a lot different than last year. I think that's the bottom line with this group.
We just talked about Michigan on our last one, and we talked about Sanistrell and kind of what he was able to bring to that team. Dalen Carnell is that guy. That's why I put him on here. He plays like that nickel role, kind of just that do-it-all guy. I mean, he started all 13 games last year, logged 51 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, 6 QB hurries, interceptions, 7 pass breakups. Like, to me, he's their kind of like in that secondary area back there. He's their leader, right? And they're going to rally around him. And how's that area look? That's why I put him on here. He really reminds me of Sanistrell from Michigan from last year. He could be that kind of do-it-all guy back there. And yeah, to your point, yeah, those are the guys up front. Yes. But maybe, you're looking at that from a piece of like, hey, that glue guy, right? We all need that towel waving glue guy. That's hell of a player on the field. And Carnell could definitely be that. And we look at their schedule, you go into this full disclosure, Missouri fans, like your team is very hard to judge because I think that they are very well coached. You have some incredible athletes out there, and you're like, man, but where is that talent? Like, on the offensive side, you worry about kind of, we know they have Luther Burden, but is there depth? Is there enough? Can Brady Cook really put him over the top? But then you look at the schedule, and you're like, the schedule's not bad. Like, they kind of got lucky in the SEC. Obviously, they play Auburn, Alabama, Oklahoma. That is a very tough stretch there. But you're talking about a South Carolina team could be, on the ropes towards the end of the year. Mississippi State, Arkansas could have fired their coach by game 12. Like, that could be a whole different area there. UMass, Vanderbilt, Boston College, Buffalo, Murray State, like very open area here. And 9.5 is an interesting line. I think that's a very, very tough line there. Where are you at with this schedule?
You know, pre-recording, I think I was teetering, right? It's really, really tough. I think the number one game that comes to mind is like this is the differentiator. I think they're a 9-win or a 10-win team, but it's Oklahoma. I think if Oklahoma by game 9, Jackson Arnold should be cooking, and so and not Brady cooking, he'll be Jackson Arnold cooking. So I think if Oklahoma can put up some points on this defense, now on the flip side. I think Missouri's defense could figure everything out by game 9. So that could be
Yeah.
a tough test for a first year starter. But I think when I look at the A&M game, I think they're losing that game. They're losing Alabama, even if Alabama's in a bit of a rebuild year. I think that's just what's going to happen. Maybe I'm wrong. Oklahoma is the teetering. I'm going to actually go under. I think they're going to lose that Oklahoma game, or if they don't, maybe they drop one of those games that we're just writing off as a win. I think they're a 9-win team. I think they're a potential playoff team in that regard, but I think I have to lean under, if only
Yeah.
because of all of that turnover on defense.
I think they hit 8 wins. I think I'm going under as well. I'm at 8 right now, just based on that roster. There's a couple throwaway games there. I think I think, to me, when I'm looking at the schedule, at Texas A&M, if they win that game, I think they're going to get close to 9.5. It is going to be very close there. They drop that game, I think it's going to be tough. To me, the game that kind of going to make or break this over under to me is versus Auburn. Auburn's a little dangerous. Jarquez Hunter being there, but again, the quarterback situation, can this defense kind of get after him a little bit? They got to beat Auburn at home, like especially going to that stretch with that Alabama versus Oklahoma. Like if they can beat Auburn, they're going to hit the over there. I don't think they do it. I like Auburn this year. I think that Auburn can they're going to get a little plunky towards the middle of the year. You want to play Auburn early in the year. You don't want to play them kind of towards the middle and the end in terms of what Hugh Freeze tries to do and his coaching ability there. So we'll see. We might have egg on our face, but we're both taking the under, kind of where this is at. But overall, I mean, you have to like where you're at as a Missouri fan. I mean, Missouri has been one of the more underrated programs because no one really talks about them, but they've done a very good job. Their transition over to the SEC, that realignment, and everyone's making fun of them going to SEC, and now look at they're in the premier conference there. So just from a standpoint of like, hey, we got to get in this, and people forgot they played for a couple of SEC championships like back when they were first there. So they're there. Being Ohio State last year was nothing to sneeze at. I mean, I know Ohio State pretended like they didn't want to be there, but they did a good job. But they got talent. They're recruiting well, and if they continue to recruit well, they're going to be right in the thick of things forever.
Yeah. To be fair, Ohio State pretended like they didn't want to be there every week they played football. That's how Ohio State was running last year. But yeah, I mean, to me, you have to feel really good about being a Missouri fan right now, just how they're recruiting, how they're hitting the portal. Like I said, there's intentionality with everything that they're doing, and the way they're building out these rosters. And really, if Brady Cook maybe, I think he's got an extra year eligibility. He comes back. Luther Burden's probably going. He's got to go. But if you can, maybe Courtney Crutchfield by then is an impact player for you already. And so you're looking at this team as a just continuous 9.5 win over under total as we're heading into the season. And then, we're talking about SEC championships because as we get these bigger conferences and tougher games and all these good teams in here, these teams are going to eat each other alive a little bit, even in the SEC. So we could be talking about Missouri SEC champions here in 2 or 3 years, or maybe even sooner than that.
Yeah, no, 100%. So Missouri fans, let us know why we're wrong in the comments. Tell us why we are dumb. They're going to hit over that 9.5, and they're going to be there. What do you think their final record's going to be? Do you think Burden can compete for the Heisman? Do you think he can kind of get there in that spot and kind of get an invite over to the Heisman ceremony? Let us know in the comments, and we will be back with our number 7 team on the next one.